phone, you can now actually, you know, the information is provided at the bottom. Questions. For questions, you can submit your questions and comments via the question panel, and then you will have a Q&A session after the presentation. Great. Okay, so we'll go over our agenda. I think if you go back, Agustina, can you go back to? Great, thank you. So we're going to go over the year-end close. Then we'll have a year-end checklist. We have a module closing order. Then we'll discuss how to close subledgers properly. And then finally, we'll have troubleshooting your year-end close. And of course, we'll have a Q&A session after that. Great. Okay, so about MIG, so who we are experts of implementation and support of leading financial institutions, and we focus on solutions. Our solutions are Microsoft Dynamics GP, Microsoft Dynamics SL, and Microsoft Dynamics CRM. We have been in business since 1998, and we assist organizations streamline their business processes, and we help them maximize their productivity. We'll move forward to the next slide. We are certified. We are a gold certified partner, and we are recognized as one of the Microsoft Business Solutions as a premier ERP provider. And we're also National Register for CPA sponsors. So if you guys are taking this webinar to get your CPA credits, please let us know, and we'll be happy to help you with that. Okay, 2015 SL year-end close. And then I'll just pass it to Duke.
Okay, let's just quickly go to my screen here. Okay, are you seeing the screen number 1 here?
Yes, we are, Duke.
Okay.
Great.
All right, thanks so much for joining us today. As an intro, my name is Duke Swenson, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. The intent of this webinar is to give you some hints and tips and avoid some of the traps of closing the year end. The process within the system is such that it's very similar to month end, but there are some nuances specifically for year end closing. So for those that have already closed the year in SL and prior years, you'll see a lot of similar processes that you'll be going through. It's a good idea to make a note as those that you haven't done in the past, or that you just need to remind yourself to make sure that you get a head start in the future. There's a couple of processes that we can do now in preparation for our year-end close. So let's go ahead and continue. The checklist that we have in summary, there's the finalizing the transactions in all modules, meaning that we're going to release and post, use the module batch summary reports to verify that all the batches are posted to the GL. Each one of the modules has a batch summary report that you can use to filter, to look and make sure that you have the batches released and posted for all periods in that year. It's probably a good idea to look at those now so that you don't get any surprises when you need to close at year end. Reconciling the submodules such as accounts receivable, accounts payable, and inventory should be done to make sure that all the numbers are actually flowing through into the general ledger. You can do a preliminary reconciliation to make sure that the transactions have come through and that all the postings have gone into your trial balance. when you print your reports, you can, one of the tips that I do is I actually print all my reports to a shared file within my network, so I know what's gone through, what's been completed, and how other people are doing in their particular process flow. Just as a reminder, you can always reprint your batch control reports by going into the individual files, and there's a report file that says reprint that particular module's reports. You can reprint them at any time. So if you need to report or print those, you can at this time. If you want to print them and save them to a file, you can do that as well. Backups are very important. I know it's in November, and we probably all have our IT departments doing our backups every day, probably a full backup. It's probably a good idea to just talk to your IT folks to make sure that not only are we able to do a backup, but we're actually able to do a restoration from the backups, and we know that process is. I've seen a couple of instances where the IT department says that we could do a backup, but it come to restoration of that backup, we didn't really know how to do that, and it was quite stressful as far as the restoration went. So let's go ahead and make sure that you not only have a backup, but you also have the opportunity to restore at any time, and how that process is going to go on. Develop a closing checklist to ensure that everything is covered, grants certain people responsibility to make sure those particular functions are closed and reconciled, so that we can disperse the responsibility to those that are in accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory, or whatever the module needs to be. So then you can go ahead and begin the closing process itself. Closing the modules is in this order, and the last one that can be closed is your general ledger. It's the one that holds all your transactions and all your final entries for reporting to your financial statements. So in the left-hand side, we show inventory, receivables, payables, and purchasing because they close together. Projects has its own set of closing processes. Payroll has a little nuance because of fiscal versus calendar year. Cash manager also needs to be closed before you can close your general ledger. So inventory movement through PO receipts or sales order shipments needs to be done first to make sure that your inventory is moved along the process as far as the inventory quantity goes, and the dollars that actually need to be pushed into your accounts payable or into your invoices through accounts receivable. In the payables and purchasing, they actually close together. So both receivables and payables, you want to make sure that you have reconciled and recognized all of your invoices and vouchers in the particular modules, so that you can make sure that there's nothing left behind. Purchasing, when you do a PO receipt, it actually can flow into your accounts payable by there's a flag in that particular PO receipt screen that allows you to create an AP voucher from that purchase order receipt. So we want to make sure that the inventory, receivables, payables, purchasing are all closed relatively close in time, specifically the purchasing, which is the PO receipts, and the inventory. As far as projects go, as we'll see later in this presentation, there is a specific process that we need to do to make sure the projects are closed in the proper order. Payroll also has a little nuance with the year-end. Assuming that your calendar year and fiscal year are the same and we end up on December 31st, the process of closing payroll will be very similar for both. If you have a fiscal year and a calendar year that are different, then payroll needs to be closed at year end at a different time. Cash manager is when we reconcile our bank recs our bank accounts to our cash detail, and we need to close that out and reconcile before we can do the general ledger. Again, the general ledger is the home plate or the final resting place for all of the posting processes, and that's where we get our financial statements. When we close our projects, be sure that the transactions are complete in all the integrated modules. For your company, everything is processed and you're getting ready for closing. Now, from the project controller, you need to make sure that your financial transaction transfer, also known as your FTT process, is invoked. You can go into your setup screen in your project controller module and make sure that the FTT financial transaction transfer is automatically done, but it's a good idea to make sure that you run it manually to make sure that nothing is left behind. So that's within the project controller itself, and there's a process called financial transaction transfer that I would recommend that you run manually, and just make sure that we don't assume that everything has come across into the projects. It actually updates the projects when we do FTT. What the function behind the FTT is anything that has come from the financial modules uses the vehicle or process for the FTT to update the projects. Sometimes the projects that are being updated also have a billing process through flexible billing that needs to be billed, so we want to make sure that we do the FTT process before we run any of our invoices through flexible billing. Closing the project controller must be closed at each fiscal period, and the reason we do this is to make sure that we keep up to date with our projects. So at the closing process, we want to make sure that all the submodules have been posted to the projects. I would use my FTT process to make sure everything is processed from financials into the projects themselves. The accounting modules are closed through additional entries, and all project charge entries are posted through the project charge entry screen itself. If you get any exceptions when you do your closing process, you're going to need to make sure you know how to resolve those exceptions. Most often it's transactions haven't been posted, and you need to go through and make sure that the information is posted to the right period before you can actually close the project controller. If there's any unprocessed time cards, you're going to need to make sure that they are processed, approved, and run through your individual flexible billing to make sure that you have recognized all the revenue that you need to for the particular year. Some troubleshooting tips on the particular project itself. There's a flag on each one of the projects themselves that allows you to do what they call a balanced forward, and what that does is allows you to bring the balance forward on all your projects through the next fiscal year. Balance forward at year end determines whether the year end totals of a project budgets and actuals are rolled forward at the beginning of the year and continue on through the next fiscal year. If you do not have those that checkbox on, only the month-to-date and year-to-date information will be captured on the following year. So it's a good idea at this particular point in time in November to review and confirm all your projects have the balance forward checkbox on to make sure that you're ready for that process. Because once you have gone through the process, and verified is always a good idea to verify that everything is okay with your projects, not only with the checkbox but also with all of your entries. Okay, so what the screen looks like is in the project management or project maintenance screen. in the middle section, I have the arrow right here. It says balance forward at year end. So for those that need to flow across fiscal periods, go ahead and check that box on for those particular projects. If you have projects or a budget or a revision has to be re-invoked every year, then go ahead and leave that checkbox off, and your project to date information will not go through into the following fiscal year. Okay. All right. So when you close the process within the project controller, there's a closing period process that we will run through. And if you see in this particular screenshot, you notice that I'm currently in period 11 and next period, period 12. So if I go ahead and you hit the bottom, the button at the bottom says begin processing. So what this will do is it will go through and validate that all the transactions have been processed and there's nothing that has not been addressed in the submodules within Project Controller, which is your time cards have actually been entered, completed, and processed. Your flexible billing has been processed and flowed into your particular accounts receivable customer list, and that all of your allocations have been moved into the particular projects themselves. If you happen to be at year end, your current period being period 12 and the next period being period 1 of the new year, the begin processing button will change to begin end year end close. So that process is going to do a little bit more than just look at the individual transactions to make sure that they have gone through. It will also do that as well as roll any of your balances for those projects that have that checkbox of balance forward to make sure that we capture project to date information going forward. When we close payables, accounts payable actually has two types of closing. There is a monthly process and a year-end process for the module itself. And when we close that, we will make sure that we reconcile our payables to the general ledger. But there's also a 1099 closing process that is required. Now that we are in November, it's a great time to validate the 1099 vendors and their 1099 balances. The way to do that, I would recommend that you start with the 1099s that you processed last year to make sure that those vendors are still a 1099 candidate, and look for any other vendors that may have been missed in the 1099 process. So being November, it's a good idea to start that process now rather than waiting till January when everybody's going to be asking for 1099 information such as tax ID and addresses and so forth. So again, there are two processes within payroll. One is the financial closing of the module itself, and the second one is the 1099 process itself, and that will happen with the year end of December 31st. When we look at our 1099s, as long as a vendor is established as a 1099 vendor, then it will you can pull up a preview of all the vendors that are currently tagged as a 1099 candidate. It will pull up a report. When you look at the 1099 preview report, it will actually print out all the vendors that have been selected as a 1099 candidate, whether it's $600 or more or not, and it will allow you to verify that those vendors are correct. Okay, so if the values are not correct, there is an opportunity to fix any incorrect vendor balances by using what we call initialization mode. When we use the initialization mode, you do need specific rights to allow you to change the data in the 1099 screen itself. So don't put this off. Go ahead and run it now. It's much easier to do it now when you have, you basically have 60 days to get it done, because as of the middle of January, we're going to need to send out our 1099s to our vendors, and we want to make sure the information is correct. Okay, when we look at our 1099 information, on this particular screenshot, I purposely left 2013, 2014, so it kind of stands out. We have a vendor maintenance screen that's shown here, and a couple of items that I want to point out in that in the top left-hand side, you'll see vendor 1099 vendor is equal to yes. So if this is a 1099 candidate, you want to make sure that it's changed from no to yes so that it can be picked up. The two other major fields that you want to go after are the tax ID number, which is the Social Security number or the tax ID number that we're going to report on, and also, and just as important, is on the right-hand side, the default 1099 box number is set. I've seen, I don't know how many different clients have set the 1099 box, vendor box to yes, and left the default to none, which means that when you do your entry of your voucher in accounts payable, the vouchers and adjustment screen, and you pull up this particular vendor, you're going to have to remember to change the box from none to box 7. So it's a good idea to have those three values populated. If it is a yes as a 1099 candidate, you want to make sure that you put in the tax ID number so you can report correctly, and also you want to make sure the default box is set as such. Each transaction line that you will be using within the vouchers and adjustment screen, if you have an invoice that one transaction is reportable for 1099 and the other one isn't, you can basically enter two lines. One is 1099able, and the second line has a value of none in the 1099 box. When the check is cut, it will recognize the value of the transaction and update the specific box with the amount that was paid. So 1099 is based on a calendar year, not necessarily a fiscal year. So within it's looking for the year of the check that was actually used to pay it. So if you were actually putting in a voucher in December, but you don't pay it till January of the next year, it's the next year's 1099 that actually will be reporting upon the check that was paid. So what I'm also going to show you in the bottom section under 1099 year, it's a good idea to review your screens to make sure that your current year, in this case 2013, and my next year, in this case 2014, are properly set. Your system probably looks at 2014, 2015, and we're going to need to roll those and basically purge out 2013, purge out 2014, move 2015 into the current year, and open up 2016 for checks in the new year. When we do have initialization mode, and you do have rights to do so, you notice that the box numbers 1 through 15B, those columns are actually enabled. When you do initialization mode, it allows us to put in the value that we want to report against this 1099. So if you happen to have a vendor that we forgot to tag as a 1099 candidate, we can go back in and update those balances for reporting purposes by using initialization mode. when we print out 1099s, we're going to be ensuring that we have a couple of reports. The best one to look at, as we talked about earlier, is the 1099 preview report. That confirms that all of the vendors that have a yes in the 1099 vendors tab is going to be reported upon. So it's a good idea to use this preview report right now, so you can kind of get an idea of which vendors have been already tagged as a 1099 vendor list. You also want to look at your vendor report itself to make sure that you haven't missed something along the way. What I generally do is print out or print to a file the vendor list and highlight the ones that are suspect to being a 1099 candidate and going after the values that we need to report, as well as the tax ID number. Okay, so when you finalize your numbers and everything looks good, you can actually go into and print out the 1099s by looking at the AP report called 1099 form report. And what that will do is basically print the information in the proper areas on the 1099 itself. It's a 1099 miscellaneous form that we'll be printing. There's usually in a pack, there's usually a form that's in black print and a form that's in red print. The red print is for the government, and the black print is for yourself and the vendors. So you want to make sure when we look at this preview report that the current year is 2015. If you haven't rolled your years forward, you will be printing the information according to the current year that you have in your system. We'll show this, well, I'll go ahead and show this to you in a couple of minutes here. When we're looking at 1099 years, as we looked at, we saw in the vendor list, there are actually 2 years that are open at any one time. There's a current year and there is the next year. So if you were to leave the prior year open in the current year, that allows you to put in checks for that particular year and also make some adjustments to avoiding those checks in that particular year as well. Depending on your settings, you may want to you're going to change your process so you can basically purge the oldest 1099 year. So if you're currently in 2013 and next year is 2000, the current year is 2013 and we're currently in 2014, then we're going to go to a process called purging oldest year. This doesn't purge any of the transactions. All it purges is the data that's in the 1099 bucket. It's all the transactions are still there. Only the reporting amount is being purged. So some folks like to go ahead and print out their 1099 reports and then actually run this process to close out or purge the oldest year, so that the current year is the current one, the current one being 2015. So if your system happens to be looking at current year of 2014 with the next year 2015, and you go to run your 1099s and print them up, it's actually only going to report on the current year, which is 2014. So it's a good idea to look at this currently and run that process. Be careful, because you want to make sure that you only click on the begin processing once. If you double click on it, you have a good chance of actually rolling 2 years. So instead of going from 14 to 15, you go from 14 to 15 to 16. You actually purge all of your data for 1099s in 2015. So just be careful and make sure you click on the begin processing button only once. So these are the screens that you need to review. So go ahead and take a note if you can here. If you look on your AP setup screen and you look at the 1099 tab itself, it'll show you what your current year is. In this case, it's 2013. with my next year of 2014. So if you're most likely yours is 2014 with the next year of 2015, the 1099 limit is set there because when we actually go through and print 1099s, we're only required to print out a 1099 for those vendors that have been paid more than $600 in a combination of any one of those boxes. So that's why the $600 limit is there. If that's not correct, make sure that it is correctly stated there. Otherwise, you'll get a whole bunch of 1099s that don't have that limit. So the limit is currently at $600. Just go ahead and make sure it's done so. As another hint and tip here, once we have gone into running this process and we've actually made our current year 2015 with our next 1099 year of 2016, it may be a good idea to go into this particular screen and change your current year status from open to closed. So in 2015, which is your current year, and we're in January of 2016, it's a good idea to close this particular year so we don't run checks into the prior year. Okay, so we can't accidentally run a check in 2015. On the right-hand side, you'll see that there is a 1099 calendar year control. This is the one I was referring to for purging oldest year. So this is one you want to be a little bit careful on to make sure that you're only clicking that begin processing button once. So I usually click it and move my hand away from the mouse and make sure that it runs accordingly. Sometimes it takes 10 seconds, 12 seconds. Sometimes it takes a minute and a half, maybe even up to 3 minutes to close out all the different vendors. It also depends on the size of your vendor list, but you just want to wait for it to come through. It'll come through with a message that the process is complete. You'll hit OK. I generally close out of this particular 1099 calendar year-end control screen and I open it back up just to make sure my current year is 2015 and my next 1099 year is 2016. Okay, so if you do this now, you'll be ready to cut checks in 2016. If you have a 1099 electronic file, there is an option within SL to generate that particular electronic file for filing. It's under the Generate 1099 Electric File screen, and as you see there are 5 different tabs. In the first one, it tells you which modules or which application you're going to go after. In the top left-hand corner, you notice that there's a radio button to make sure you're reporting on the correct year. Go ahead and look at your Payer Agent tab to make sure your tax ID number and your information is correct, including a phone number. That's what will be printed on the 1099s and the magnetic media. If you wanted to look at your transmitter tab, you'll also notice that there's a control code that's issued by the IRS that you'll need to put in, and your tax ID number, the company name that you're going to use to transmit this information based upon. If this will normally default from your company information ID screen, so if this is not correct, just verify that the name of the company, the reporting name, the address, phone number, contact information, as you see the contact name is actually required, is filled in. So we can, before we begin processing, we want to make sure all these fields have been populated correctly. Go ahead and confirm the data and hit the begin processing button at the bottom and it'll actually generate a file. When you transmit the file, the control code comes from, as we saw just a minute ago, the control code is the one that we're going to be using from the IRS. Most information populates directly from your company information maintenance screen. If it is not correct, you want to make sure it's corrected on the 1099 transmission tab. But if it is not correct, you probably want to go back into your company maintenance screen and make sure that address is correct for next year. Add the contact information, double check for accuracy, and you're good to go. Closing the sub-modules properly, specifically with payroll. Now payroll is a little different because it only looks at processes and payments based on a calendar year. So if your fiscal year is not equal to a calendar year, you're going to need to close out your payroll at the end of December. So if your December happens to be period 6, then at the end of period 6, you're going to be closing out the other modules as period, but you're going to be closing out the payroll as year. So it actually closes out the year for the actual calendar year. Process your final payrolls and make sure that the information is correct. Go ahead and do your period and quarter procedures. You want to calculate your W-2s at the end of the period for December. Review any of the W-2s for accuracy. You can print your forms just like we had seen in the accounts payables 1099. There's a print W-2 forms that allows you to print those through your printer. There is also an option for you to produce a magnetic media file for uploading to the government. Payroll is based, again, on calendar year and not on your fiscal year. Okay, payroll applies. Payroll is often updated at the end of the year. Sometimes it's actually updated as well in July. So what you want to make sure that you can get to your customer source to make sure that within SL you can download the proper tables and make sure that your tax calculations are properly installed. You want to do this after you close your year end for payroll. You want to do it after you close, but before you process the new payroll for the next period, or January, the first payroll in January. Applying the year-end updates. I talked about this customer source. If you need assistance with the customer source, please contact your MIG project manager or your MIG account manager. You can also send us an email at info@mig.com to get that information. It's a good idea to make sure that you have customer source available. There's a lot of hints and tips and opportunities for finding out the downloads and what needs to be updated for the next and current year. So, and just as I just printed a screenshot from 2014 just to give you an idea. In 2014 we had some year-end updates for each one of the different module versions of Solomon, the Solomon 2011 SP1, feature the FP1, the SERS Pack 2. Also, there were some July payroll updates that came into effect and went into effect in July, and we wanted to make sure that we download those and install them properly before we do our first July payroll. So again, if you do not have access to customer source, please contact MIG and we can help you get that set up. When we calculate W-2s, we open the calculation screen, choose the current 1099 or sorry, the current W-2 year, select the different pay groups to calculate, and begin processing. The W-2s will actually calculate and get ready for your process. If you review your data, you can use plain paper copy report to print out the different boxes around the calculated figures to verify the box information. If you have pre-printed forms, you can also use those and stick those into your printer and have the data print in the right boxes in the right area. use the W-2 history screen or file to verify employee information. And this information would be looking at the employee's name, make sure there wasn't any name changes over the year, the address, the social security number. These are vital information that we need to validate now, so when we transmit the W-2s, everything goes through the IRS correctly. If you need to correct the W-2s, we need to. There's obviously there's some federal information that we need to look at. There may be some state information that we need to look at. If you need to make any of these fixes, we basically go into initialization mode, assuming that you have special rights to do so, and we go right into the W-2 screen itself, and in the employee history screen to make those particular corrections. It's a good idea to verify that those are all done beforehand, so when we get to this process, we don't have any problems with the reporting. So tax amounts are correct, determine the cause of the problem, use initialize mode to make those corrections. Important notes here, the key is to correct the setup issues to avoid the problems in the following year. So if you do find that there is a problem with one of the deductions or one of the tax calculations, you want to make sure that those employees are set correctly so that we don't miss them for next time. Make a backup of the database prior to using initialization mode. That way, if something goes really, really wrong, you can just restore and you're back to where you were before. Obviously, this is a good process to do when you have a controlled process or a controlled environment. If you're running this process and you make a mistake, you can always go back initialization mode and basically update the data that's being reported. But it's a good idea to make sure that you have a controlled environment just in case you need to restore the database that you just backed up. Be careful when using initialization mode and modifying the employee history, because what you override is actually going to stick in the history for that particular employee. Okay, just like we saw with the 1099s and accounts payable, you can produce a W-2 magnetic media file. In the payroll module, there is a W-2 magnetic media screen that you'll need to open up, populate the calendar year, make sure that you change the file path to make sure that you know where it's going to go. Often, I'm snickering because I've done this myself. We assume we know where this file is going and we push the button and then we say, oh, where did it go again? So this is a trick that I do, is when I look at that path for where the file is supposed to be posted to, I actually write it down on a piece of paper. That way I know exactly where it's going and I don't have to guess where it's supposed to go. I'm assuming it's going to go one way and it actually goes another, and then I have to do a search on the file name to figure out where I put it. Update the transmitter PIN number provided by the Social Security Administration, and update any contact information. If there's anybody that had a name change over the year, make sure those names are correct, spelled and correctly identified. The company information fields default from your company maintenance, as we talked about just a little bit ago, and they can be overwritten. So if you do override them, you want to go back into the company maintenance screen to make sure that they are correct for next year. When we're closing payroll, the closing payroll actually happens within the GL module itself. So come December, we will make sure that we close the year regardless of the fiscal period that we're in. So if you happen to have a calendar year that's not equal to your fiscal year is how you're reporting the books, but it's the calendar year that's how we're going to be reporting our payroll, and that's how we need to close out our process in the payroll screens themselves. So closing, we'll cycle payroll to the next calendar year. And closing will also create the deductions and history records for 2015, allowing new checks to be created in 2016. So just as an example here, I know that I'm showing fiscal periods of 12 across the middle section here on all the modules. If this happens to be the last period of the year being December, then we're going to be using my closing type equal to year and not period. If you try to use period, it's going to come back to you and say, sorry, this is not the proper the closing type. This happens to be December, so you need to close it for the year. Once you begin processing, it's going to roll all the processes for you and allow you to cut checks for payroll in the next year. Now, just as a notation, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, and we did touch on it at the beginning, the last thing that needs to be closed is general ledger. So payroll is the only one that can actually be rolled to the next year without having general ledger closed. That's assuming that your fiscal year and your calendar years are not the same. In this particular case, where all my last period is period 12, I'll have to close payroll for the year, I'll have to close cash manager for the year, inventory for the year, receivables for the year. As you notice that accounts payable and purchasing work together since they have a lot of shared information, so they will actually close at the same time, and that's when I'll change the year. The last thing we'll want to do is close out my general ledger so I can make sure that all my entries are in before I do that, all my financial reports and so forth have been completed. Okay, so finalizing your year-end close. Always, general ledger is always the last one to close. So you need to make sure that you don't need to close it immediately, but you do need to close it with all of your year-end adjustments. Other than the auto adjustments, you can wait for those and post them back into the right period. Verify that all the batches have been released. A good way to do that is when you go into the GL batch register, you want to make sure that you can look at that particular field called, there's a tab called select. In the select criteria, the first one would be batch.status. The operator would be in as an in list, and the values would be B, comma, H, comma, and U for balanced, hold, and unposted. So if you use that criteria that we see in this particular screen, you can use this in general ledger, you can use this in accounts receivable, accounts payable. A lot of the modules will allow you to look at the batch status report and make sure that everything that hasn't been posted you're aware of. This is a good process to run now in November. So, and I would open up the range. You're going to see the screen. It's going to have a beginning period and an ending period. It's going to default to the current period, which would be period 11. If you want to open that up to period 1 of 2015 through 11 of 2015, run this process, it just goes back and looks at all the periods within that particular year to make sure that everything is closed out properly and posted. You may have a batch that's on hold that was back in January that you didn't know about. It's a good idea to look at it now and reconcile to make sure that that data needs to be posted up, or possibly the batch just needs to be deleted and moved on. Okay, we have a couple more slides here. One of the, under your quick query, there is a opportunity to look at your open batches by just querying the database. And I went into the financial sections and into the general ledger. There's one called batches, and we can look at the different batches. And you can look at if you look at the third column, you'll see one of H and C's and some D's, they've been deleted or on hold. Those are what you can select them and sort them based on the status. So all the H's come and B's come to the top, and you can verify that all the batches have come across. In the fifth different column where it says module, it tells you which module it actually came from, and you can go back to those particular module to pull up that batch to figure out what's going on and why it hasn't been posted. Closing the general ledger. You should always be ready to close at year-end. The year-end closing process will do the following. It sets the current period of general ledger to the first period of the year. It establishes the new year's beginning balances for all assets, liabilities, and equity accounts. And most importantly, it zeroes out the income expenses, closes out the year-to-date net income into retained earnings for period 1 of the new year. So what you'll have as a beginning balances for period 1 in your revenue and expenses will be zeros, and everything has been posted up into your balance sheet, particularly into retained earnings. When we finalize our year-end close, all we need to do is change the closing type from do not close to year, and it will actually close. Just as a note here, again, I'm looking at period 12. If I try to close general ledger before the modules below it are closed, it's going to give me a warning saying, or it won't let me close because all the supporting modules have to be closed first before you can close the general ledger. If you happen to have an adjustment period number 13 in your system, then you'll need to close the period for period 12 and then close the year for period 13. The best practices that we have here to ensure that no one has logged into SL while you're doing your closing process, it's a good idea, not mandatory, but it's a good idea to make sure everything closes out properly. Again, it's going to run a bunch of process to make sure that your account history tables are updated and your year-to-date income and retained earnings are rolled forward. You would just want to make sure that you're not running a check run or doing some other major process at the same time to give you some focus on your closing process. Always make sure that you have 2 backups for both the system and the application database. Perform the first one before you do your closing procedure, and the second one just after. Read the documentation and follow the order of the modules as we talked about just a bit ago. Follow inventory is probably the one that moves the most. You want to make sure that's solidified. If you have to do a physical count or physical year-end book to physical, you want to make sure that that's done before you actually close out of the inventory itself for that particular year. Make sure you save all your year-end reports. As I mentioned before, it's a good idea. And one of the things I do is instead of having a bunch of paper in a binder, I actually print the reports to a shared file within the network and have all my reports there for me to review. Some of the questions that I get regarding the year-end closing, one of them is I have to wait until all of my adjustment entries are entered before I can actually close the GL. And my answer is, well, no, you can do all your normal adjustment entries that you need to do, but if you're waiting on your audit adjustments, you can actually close out your general ledger now, wait for those audit adjustments to come in. If they come in, February, March, or whatever, you can actually post those back to the proper year, and it will actually roll the balances forward to the proper asset or liability. If it's a revenue or expense, it will actually do that process of closing out the year-to-date net income and posting the adjustment into retained earnings for period 1 of the following year. So my thought is you want to close out general ledgers and the year-end as quickly as you can. You don't have to wait for your audit adjustments to close the books. You don't want to fly blind January, February, March waiting for your audit adjustments to come through. Second question that I get, I'm running my general ledger at year-end close. Do I need to close it twice if our fiscal year is not the same as our calendar year? The only module that you have to watch is payrolls in specific. There is the issue with the 1099s that you have to watch for at the end of the December period, so that you can cut checks in the new year. But you don't need to close everything twice. In fact, general ledger will only allow you to close the year once at the last of the periods within the system. And the other third question that I get a lot is, I can close accounts payable, receivables whenever I get around to it. I think, well, knowing that you have to close out receivables and payables in order to close the general ledger, it's probably a good idea to close out payables and receivables, now, as soon as possible, so you can close out the general ledger. There are a couple of reports in receivables and payables that you can use to get back to your period 12 entries. There is an aging in accounts payable and accounts receivable called period sensitive aged AR or AP. Then you'll set the period to 12 of 2015. That way you can get an aging based on that particular period. So you don't have to wait around and make sure you have those reports. The other two reports that you can use is the period sensitive vendor trial balance and the period sensitive customer trial balance that are in the respective modules that you can use to look at these vendor or customer balances as of the end of period 12 of the current year, or actually whatever period that you need to look at. Those are the reports to your general ledger, and the ones that specifically because general ledger is a period-to-post sensitive module, and when we use the period sensitive reports, we can tie out to the general ledger pretty quickly. So those are the three big questions that I get, and we answer at the end of most of the years. So is there any other questions or maybe some hints and tips that you have found out as the customers are going? Is there any other questions that you have for me that I can answer at this time?
You can submit your questions through the chat, and we'll be happy to address them if there are any. We'll wait a few minutes. Great.
There was a lot of information that we presented today, and I'm hoping that majority of this information you knew about. Maybe I gave you some hints and tips on some process that you hadn't thought about or had forgotten about, since you didn't do it. You don't do it on a monthly basis, but you have to do it on a calendar year. My biggest push or recommendation would be going after those 1099 vendors. Looking at those now, being November, why everybody is still in a kind of a easy peasy type of process right now, and not have to worry about generating 1099s in January when everybody's trying to close out the books and the stress is a little bit higher. Any other questions?
It looks like we don't have any more questions. Thank you, Duke, for taking the time.
You're welcome.
It was really, really informative.
Okay, do you want to take the presentation back and finish?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
And I will, there you go.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay, so we want to go over some of the MIG support. As you know, MIG support plans are reliable and consistent support service programs for businesses running Microsoft Dynamics. And we basically include the benefits of they include support with Microsoft Dynamics products. We support with any related third-party add-ons, and we have fixed rate plans as well. Great, and we also have training. MIG has customized training to your needs, and some of our training benefits include various training options. We are available, we also have training with our support plans, and we have group discounts as well. If you have any questions regarding that, please let us know. And at the end, there's a survey that will appear. This survey is designed to help us evaluate and improve our webinar, so please take a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. We look forward to hearing from you.